On a humid morning in June 2004, in the small coastal town of Port St. Clair, Florida, a young woman named Michelle Hartley vanished from her own bedroom while her husband slept just down the hall. She was 28 years old, a kindergarten teacher beloved by her students, a daughter who called her mother every Sunday without fail. Her car sat in the driveway. Her purse rested on the kitchen counter. Her coffee mug, still half full, waited on the nightstand beside a book she would never finish reading. When the sun rose over the mangrove swamps that morning, Michelle Hartley had simply ceased to exist within the walls of her own home, and the man who shared her bed claimed he had heard nothing, seen nothing, knew nothing. The question that would haunt Port St. Clair for nearly 2 decades was deceptively simple. How does a woman disappear from a locked house in the middle of the night? And why did the person closest to her seem so strangely calm about the whole thing? The town of Port St. Clair sits tucked against Florida's Gulf Coast, a place where the air always carries the salt-sweet smell of the ocean mixed with the earthier scent of wetlands. In 2004, it was home to just under 8,000 people, most of them working families who had lived there for generations, their livelihoods tied to commercial fishing, tourism, and the citrus groves that stretched inland toward the center of the state. The houses were modest ranch-style homes with hurricane shutters and screened-in porches, built low to the ground as if bracing against the storms that rolled in each summer. Oleander bushes lined the streets. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks in the older neighborhoods. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children rode their bicycles until the streetlights came on, where everyone knew everyone else's business or thought they did. Michelle Hartley had grown up 3 towns over in Palmetto Springs, but she had fallen in love with Port St. Clair during her student teaching placement at Bayside Elementary. She met David Hartley at a 4th of July barbecue in 2001. He was 32 then, 4 years older than Michelle, a stocky man with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands who worked as a marine equipment technician at the harbor. Those who knew him said he was quiet, kept to himself mostly, had a temper that flared up when he drank but settled down just as quickly. Michelle's friends thought he was too withdrawn, too controlling about small things like what time she came home from girls' nights or who she talked to at community events. But Michelle told them he was just protective, that he had been hurt before in a previous relationship, that underneath the rough exterior was a man who needed her. They married in March 2003 in a small ceremony at the Methodist Church on Pelican Avenue. Michelle wore her grandmother's veil. David wore a rented suit that pulled tight across his shoulders. In the wedding photos, Michelle is radiant, her smile wide and genuine. David stands beside her with his jaw set, his eyes not quite meeting the camera. They moved into a 3-bedroom house on Coral Drive, a quiet street that dead-ended at a retention pond where egrets hunted in the shallows. Michelle painted the spare bedroom yellow, talking about the children they would have someday. David spent his weekends working on a boat he kept at the marina, a 23-foot fishing vessel he had bought second-hand and was slowly restoring. Clears throat. The morning of June 14, 2004, began like any other Monday. Michelle woke at 5:30, her alarm clock buzzing in the pre-dawn darkness. David was already awake, standing in the kitchen drinking coffee in his work clothes, dark blue coveralls with his name stitched over the pocket. She made herself toast with strawberry jam. They spoke briefly about mundane things, the grocery shopping that needed doing, a dripping faucet in the bathroom, whether the air conditioning unit was making a strange noise. David left for work at 6:15. Michelle watched him from the kitchen window as he backed his truck out of the driveway, the taillights disappearing around the corner where Coral Drive met Mangrove Street. Michelle spent that Monday teaching summer school to a group of rising first graders. Her colleague, Donna Briggs, would later tell investigators that Michelle seemed completely normal that day. She wore a blue sundress with white flowers. She laughed during lunch when one of the children mispronounced the word peninsula as peninsular. She stayed after school to organize craft supplies for the next day's lesson. She left the building at 4:20 in the afternoon, waving goodbye to the custodian as she walked to her car in the parking lot. According to phone records, Michelle called her mother, Patricia Donovan, at 4:45 while driving home. They talked for 11 minutes about Michelle's younger sister's upcoming bridal shower and whether the family should rent a beach house together in August. Patricia would remember that Michelle sounded happy, that she mentioned stopping at the Publix grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. The call ended at 4:56. Security footage from the Publix on Highway 41 showed Michelle entering the store at 5:08. She wore sunglasses pushed up on her head. She carried a canvas shopping bag over her shoulder. She spent 19 minutes inside, selecting chicken breasts, fresh asparagus, a carton of rice, a bottle of white wine. She paid with her debit card at 5:27. She arrived home at approximately 5:40. The neighbor across the street, an elderly man named Harold Vickers, was watering his front lawn. He waved to Michelle as she got out of her car. She waved back, called out something cheerful about the heat. She carried 2 grocery bags into the house through the side door that led directly into the kitchen. Harold Vickers would be the last person besides David Hartley to see Michelle alive. Though alive is perhaps not the right word because no one truly knew when Michelle Hartley stopped being alive. David claimed he arrived home from work at 6:30, his usual time. He said Michelle was cooking dinner, that the house smelled like garlic and lemon. He said he took a shower to wash off the grease and salt from the day. He said they ate together at the kitchen table, that they watched a television show afterward, something about home renovations. He said Michelle seemed tired. He said she went to bed around 9:30 while he stayed up watching a baseball game. He said he fell asleep on the couch sometime after 11. He said when he woke up at 5 the next morning and went to the bedroom to get ready for work, Michelle was gone. That is what David Hartley told the police when he called 911 at 5:23 on the morning of Tuesday, June 15th. His voice on the recording is flat, almost monotone. "My wife is missing," he says. "She's not in the house. Her car is here, but she's not." The dispatcher asks if they had an argument. David says no. The dispatcher asks if Michelle has a history of leaving unexpectedly. David says no. The dispatcher asks if the doors were locked. David pauses for a moment, then says he thinks so. He is not sure. Maybe the back slider was unlocked. The dispatcher tells him officers are on the way. 2 deputies from the Port St. Clair Sheriff's Office arrived at the house on Coral Drive at 5:38. They found David Hartley standing in the driveway, still in the clothes he claimed to have slept in, a white undershirt and gray sweatpants. Deputy Robert Finch noted in his report that David appeared calm, almost detached. He was not crying. He was not frantic. He led the deputies through the house, pointing to the bedroom where he said Michelle should have been. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled on one side. Michelle's phone sat charging on the nightstand. Her wedding ring was in a small ceramic dish near the bathroom sink where she always left it at night because it irritated her finger while she slept. Her purse, her wallet, her identification, her keys, all of it was there. Deputy Finch asked David to walk him through the previous evening again. David repeated the same story. Dinner, television, Michelle going to bed early, himself falling asleep on the couch. He added that he had not heard anything unusual during the night, no sounds of struggle, no doors opening or closing. Deputy Finch asked if Michelle had seemed upset about anything lately. David said no, everything was fine, they were happy. Deputy Finch asked about their relationship. David said it was good, no problems, no fights. Deputy Finch noted that David maintained eye contact when he spoke, but showed no emotional distress. Clears throat. By 7 in the morning, the search for Michelle Hartley had begun in earnest. Additional deputies arrived. Detective James Kowalski from the Major Crimes Unit took over as lead investigator. He ordered a systematic search of the house and property. They walked through every room, opened every closet, checked the attic crawlspace and the outdoor storage shed. They found nothing disturbed, nothing missing except Michelle herself. The back slider door that led to the screened porch was unlocked, but there were no signs of forced entry anywhere. The screens were intact. The windows were latched from the inside. Detective Kowalski asked David about Michelle's habits. Did she go for early morning walks? Did she have friends she might visit unexpectedly? David said no to everything. Michelle was not an early riser. She did not like to exercise. She would not leave the house without her phone or her car. None of it made sense, David insisted, and yet his insistence felt performative somehow, as if he were saying what he thought he should say rather than what he genuinely felt. By mid-morning, word had spread through Port St. Clair. Volunteers began gathering at the house. Teachers from Bayside Elementary arrived with bottles of water and concern etched on their faces. Michelle's parents drove down from Palmetto Springs, her mother already crying as she got out of the car, her father looking pale and stunned. Patricia Donovan grabbed David's arms and asked him what happened. Where was her daughter? What had he done? David stepped back from her. He said he did not know. He said he woke up and she was gone. Patricia would later tell investigators that something in his eyes was wrong, that he looked at her like she was a stranger, like her grief was an inconvenience. Search teams fanned out across the neighborhood. They walked the streets calling Michelle's name. They searched the retention pond, dragging poles through the murky water. They combed through the mangrove swamps that bordered the town's eastern edge, pushing through mud and standing water, watching for alligators while looking for any sign of a missing woman. The temperature climbed into the low 90s. The air hung thick with humidity. By afternoon, more than 60 people were involved in the search. Local news crews arrived, setting up cameras near the house on Coral Drive. Michelle's face appeared on the 5 o'clock news, a photo from her school identification badge where she smiled with her head tilted slightly, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Detective Kowalski interviewed David Hartley formally at 3 o'clock that afternoon. They sat in a small room at the sheriff's office substation. The interview was recorded. David repeated his timeline again. He seemed irritated now, frustrated that people kept asking him the same questions. Detective Kowalski asked about their marriage. David said it was fine. Detective Kowalski asked if David had ever been violent with Michelle. David said no, never. Detective Kowalski asked if they had argued recently about anything. David said no, they barely argued at all. Detective Kowalski noted in his report that David showed no signs of deception, but also no signs of genuine worry. Most husbands in this situation are distraught, unable to sit still, desperate to be out searching. David Hartley sat with his arms crossed, answering questions like he was filling out paperwork. Investigators pulled phone records. Michelle's last call was to her mother the previous afternoon. David's phone showed calls to work contacts and a pizza delivery placed the week before, nothing unusual. They checked the couple's bank accounts. No large withdrawals, no suspicious transactions. They examined Michelle's computer. Her browser history showed recipe websites, email exchanges with friends about the upcoming bridal shower, nothing that suggested she was planning to leave or that anything was wrong. They interviewed neighbors. Everyone said the Hartleys seemed like a normal couple, quiet, kept to themselves. Harold Vickers mentioned that sometimes he heard David's voice raised late at night, that once he saw Michelle sitting on the front steps crying, But when he asked if she was okay, she said she was fine, just tired. By the end of the first day, Michelle Hartley had been missing for approximately 24 hours. The sheriff's office issued a statement calling it an active missing person investigation. They urged anyone with information to come forward. David Hartley gave a brief statement to reporters, standing on the lawn of his house while cameras filmed him. He wore a clean shirt and jeans. His voice was steady. "Please, if anyone has seen Michelle or knows anything, please contact the police. We just want her home safe." He did not cry. He did not plead. He spoke like he was reading from a script someone else had written. For those who have ever watched a family member face the cameras after tragedy, there is a particular quality to genuine desperation. It shows in the tremor of hands, the breaking voice, the inability to maintain composure. David Hartley showed none of this. Investigators noticed. Michelle's family noticed. The community noticed. The search continued for 3 more days. Dive teams checked deeper sections of the retention pond and nearby water bodies. Cadaver dogs were brought in from the county. They alerted near the back of the property, where the lawn met a thick tangle of Brazilian pepper trees and saw palmetto, but excavation revealed nothing. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the surrounding area. The Coast Guard searched the coastline. Hundreds of flyers with Michelle's photo were distributed throughout Port St. Clair and neighboring towns. On June 18th, Detective Kowalski sat down with David Hartley again. This time he asked more pointed questions. He asked David if he had any scratches or injuries. David showed his arms, his hands, nothing. Detective Kowalski asked if David owned any guns. David said no. Detective Kowalski asked if they could search David's boat at the marina. David said sure, go ahead. They searched the vessel thoroughly. They found fishing equipment, life jackets, empty beer cans, old rope, nothing that raised suspicion. Forensic teams processed the house on Coral Drive again, this time looking specifically for blood evidence. They used luminol in the bedroom, the bathroom, the garage. Some minor spots lit up in the garage near where David parked his truck, but testing showed it was not human blood, likely from fish or other marine life that David sometimes cleaned there. Michelle's credit cards were never used again after June 14th. Her phone never pinged another cell tower. Her social security number generated no activity. She had vanished as completely as if she had never existed, and the only person who claimed to have been present when she disappeared could offer no explanation that satisfied anyone. Clear's throat. As June turned to July, the investigation began to slow. Leads dried up. Tips that came and led nowhere. Psychics called offering their services. Conspiracy theorists on internet message boards speculated wildly, but solid evidence remained maddeningly absent. Detective Kowalski wrote in his notes, "Subject displays unusual lack of affect. Timeline has inconsistencies but cannot establish definitive proof. Without body, without witnesses, without physical evidence, case is at standstill." The truth is that most missing person cases without clear evidence of abduction or foul play within the first 48 hours become exponentially harder to solve. The trail goes cold. Memories fade. People move on. Life, with its relentless forward momentum, carries on even when someone's absence tears a hole in the fabric of normalcy. By August, the daily searches had stopped. The news crews packed up their equipment and moved on to other stories. The flyers with Michelle's face faded in the Florida sun, tacked to telephone poles and bulletin boards, gradually becoming part of the background scenery that people stopped noticing. David Hartley returned to work at the marina. Neighbors saw him coming and going at his usual times. He mowed the lawn. He took out the trash. He lived in the house on Coral Drive, as if his wife had never existed, and this more than anything else disturbed those who paid attention. Michelle's parents called Detective Kowalski every week for months, asking if there were updates, if there were new leads, if anyone was still looking. Patricia Donovan could not accept that her daughter had simply vanished. She hired a private investigator with money the family could barely afford. The investigator reviewed everything, interviewed everyone again, and came to the same conclusion that police had. All signs pointed to David Hartley, but there was no evidence to charge him with anything. Michelle's father, Thomas Donovan, drove to Port St. Clair and confronted David in the driveway one September evening. Neighbors heard shouting. Thomas accused David of taking his daughter. David stood silent, his face expressionless, until Thomas finally got back in his car and left. The case went cold. It remained officially open but inactive, one of dozens of unsolved disappearances in Florida that year. Michelle Hartley became a statistic, a name in a database, a sad story that people in Port St. Clair mentioned occasionally and then forgot about as the years passed. What no one knew in those months and years immediately following Michelle's disappearance was that truth has its own timeline, that secrets kept in darkness will sometimes find their way toward light, not through justice or divine intervention, but through the simple human inability to carry weight indefinitely without collapsing. 2 years passed, then 3. David Hartley continued living in the house on Coral Drive. He started dating again in late 2006, a woman named Jennifer Moss who worked as a waitress at a seafood restaurant near the harbor. Jennifer knew about Michelle, knew that David's wife had disappeared, but David told her that Michelle had left him, that she had run off with someone she had met online, that the whole missing person investigation was his attempt to find her and bring her back. Jennifer believed him, or wanted to, because David could be charming when he chose to be, attentive in ways that made her feel special. They moved in together in early 2007. Jennifer brought her daughter from a previous relationship, a girl named Emma who was 6 years old, quiet and observant in the way that children from unstable homes often are. Emma did not like David. She told her mother that he was mean, that he yelled too much, that he looked at her in ways that made her uncomfortable. Jennifer told Emma to give him a chance, that David was good to them, that they needed the stability he provided. But stability built on lies is just another word for imprisonment. Jennifer began to notice things. David's temper, which he had controlled around her initially, erupted over small things. Dinner being late, the television volume being too loud, Emma leaving toys in the living room. He drank more than Jennifer had realized. He became possessive, questioning where Jennifer had been if she came home 15 minutes later than expected, checking her phone when she was in the shower, isolating her from friends who expressed concern. In 2008, Jennifer tried to leave. She packed bags while David was at work, but David came home early, found her loading the car, and the argument that followed turned physical. Emma watched from her bedroom window as David grabbed Jennifer's arm, as Jennifer pulled away, as they shouted words the child could not fully understand but knew meant danger. Jennifer stayed. She unpacked the bags. She told herself it would get better, that she could manage his moods, that Emma needed a father figure even if that figure was flawed. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have seen cracks in their story but chosen to look away because looking directly at the truth would shatter everything you have built, you understand the prison Jennifer Moss was living in. She suspected. Deep in her bones, she suspected that David Hartley had done something terrible to his first wife. But suspicion without proof is just paranoia, and paranoia can be gaslighted away by someone skilled in manipulation. The years accumulated like sediment. 2009, 2010, 2011. Emma grew older, more withdrawn. She stopped talking about what happened in the house. She drew pictures in school of storms and broken things. Her teachers noticed but did not press. Port St. Clair was a small town where people minded their own business, where family troubles were considered private matters unless they spilled out into public view. Clear's throat. In 2012, Jennifer found David's old cell phone, the one he had been using back in 2004. She had been cleaning out a box in the garage when she discovered it at the bottom, wrapped in an old shirt. She knew she should not look. She knew that looking meant crossing a line from which there would be no return. She powered it on. The battery was dead, but she found a charger that fit. When the phone came to life, she scrolled through old messages, old call logs. What she found made her blood run cold. There were text messages from June 14, 2004, the day Michelle disappeared. Messages to someone saved in David's contacts simply as M. The texts were brief but damning in their implications. "It has to be tonight. Make sure no one sees you. Afterward we can finally be together." The responses from M were equally cryptic. "Are you sure? What about the boat? I'm scared." The final message from David, sent at 10:47 that night: "It's done. Don't contact me again for a while." Jennifer sat in the garage holding the phone, her hands shaking. She did not know who M was. She did not know what it referred to in the messages. But the date, the timing, the secrecy, all of it pointed to something Jennifer had tried not to believe for years. She took photos of the messages with her own phone. Then she put David's old phone back exactly where she had found it. She waited. She was not sure what she was waiting for, perhaps courage, perhaps certainty, perhaps just the right moment when leaving would not result in her becoming another woman who disappeared. But Emma made the decision for her. In March 2013, Emma was 12 years old enough to understand more than adults gave her credit for. She told a school counselor that she was afraid to go home, that David hurt her mother, that she sometimes heard him talking to himself late at night about making people disappear. The counselor was mandated to report. Child Protective Services got involved. Jennifer was interviewed. Under pressure, she confessed her suspicions. She showed the photos of the text messages to the CPS investigator. The investigator contacted the sheriff's office. On April 2, 2013, Detective Maria Santos, who had taken over cold cases from the now-retired Detective Kowalski, received the information from Child Protective Services. She pulled the Michelle Hartley file, read through years of reports and dead ends, and felt the particular excitement that comes when a case long dormant shows signs of life. She obtained a warrant for David Hartley's phone records, both old and new. She began looking for M. It took 3 weeks of cross-referencing numbers and names, but Detective Santos found her. Her name was Marissa Gilchrist. She had worked at the Marina office in 2004, had quit her job abruptly in July of that year, and moved to North Carolina. Detective Santos contacted her through her current employer. Initially, Marissa refused to talk. But when Detective Santos explained that they had the text messages, that obstruction of justice charges were a possibility, Marissa finally agreed to an interview. On May 7, 2013, Marissa Gilchrist sat across from Detective Santos in an interview room in Charlotte, North Carolina. The interview was recorded. Marissa was 38 years old now, a woman who looked worn down by secrets. She cried as she spoke. She said she had been having an affair with David Hartley in the spring of 2004. She said David told her he was going to leave his wife. She said she believed him. She said when Michelle disappeared, David told her it was a coincidence, that Michelle had left on her own. She said she had been too afraid to come forward because David had told her that if she said anything, he would make sure she disappeared too. Detective Santos asked about the messages. Marissa said she did not know what David meant by "it's done." She said she assumed at the time it meant he had confronted Michelle about the affair, that maybe Michelle had left because of that. But over the years, doubt had eaten at her. She said she eventually convinced herself that she was being paranoid. She said she got married, had children, tried to build a normal life. She said she never stopped wondering. Detective Santos asked if David had ever mentioned disposing of anything, getting rid of evidence. Marissa paused, then nodded. She said one night before Michelle disappeared, David had talked hypothetically about the ocean, about how bodies that went far enough out never came back, about how boats left no trail. She had thought it was just dark humor at the time, the kind of morbid thing people say without meaning. Now she was not sure. Armed with this new information, Detective Santos got authorization to reopen the Michelle Hartley investigation fully. She obtained warrants to search the property on Coral Drive again, to search David's boat, to search his current place of employment. On June 14, 2013, exactly 9 years after Michelle Hartley vanished, a team of investigators executed the warrants. David was at work when they arrived at the house. Jennifer and Emma had already been moved to a safe location. Investigators spent hours going through the property with equipment that had not existed or had not been available in 2004. Ground-penetrating radar swept the yard. They tore up sections of the garage floor. They dismantled parts of the boat, examining every crevice. In the bedroom closet, underneath layers of clothing and boxes, they found a locked metal case. They forced it open. Inside were photographs of Michelle, but not normal photos. These were surveillance-style images. Michelle at work, Michelle at the grocery store, Michelle talking to neighbors, all taken from a distance as if David had been watching her. There were handwritten notes on some of the photos. Talks too much to this one. Watched her go in here. The notes were in David's handwriting. At the bottom of the case was Michelle's wedding ring, the one that had supposedly been in the ceramic dish by the bathroom sink when she disappeared. Its presence in David's private, locked case contradicted his entire story. If Michelle had vanished on her own or been taken by an intruder, why would her wedding ring be hidden among David's possessions? Clears throat. On June 15, 2013, David Hartley was arrested at the marina as he finished his shift. Detective Santos read him his rights. David said nothing. He was transported to the county jail and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Michelle Hartley, though Michelle's body had never been found. Florida law allows for murder charges without a body if sufficient circumstantial evidence exists. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Assistant State Attorney Gerald Morrison, believed they had enough. The arrest made headlines. After 9 years, the Michelle Hartley case was front-page news again. Port St. Clair residents who had forgotten about the missing kindergarten teacher were reminded. Michelle's parents, who had never stopped grieving, felt a complicated mix of vindication and renewed agony. Patricia Donovan gave a statement to reporters. "We always knew," she said, her voice breaking. "We always knew he did something to our daughter. We just could not prove it." The community was divided. Some people insisted David was innocent, that the evidence was too thin, that you cannot convict someone of murder without a body. Others said they had suspected all along, that David's behavior had always been wrong, that evil sometimes hides in plain sight wearing the mask of an ordinary man. David's trial began in March 2014. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They presented the text messages between David and Marissa. They brought Marissa to the stand. She testified tearfully about the affair, about David's comments about the ocean, about her fear that had kept her silent for years. They presented the surveillance photos and the hidden wedding ring. They called neighbors who testified to hearing arguments, to seeing Michelle cry. They called Donna Briggs, Michelle's teaching colleague, who testified that Michelle had mentioned being unhappy at home, that she had said David was becoming more controlling. They presented phone records showing David had called his own home phone multiple times on the morning Michelle disappeared, as if establishing an alibi that he was somewhere else when in fact he had been home the entire time. The defense argued that none of this proved murder. They pointed out that no body had been found. They suggested Michelle could have run away, that the affair gave her reason to leave. They characterized the prosecution's case as speculation built on a foundation of suspicion rather than fact. They put character witnesses on the stand who said David was a hard worker, a reliable employee, someone who had never been violent. They pointed to the lack of physical evidence. No blood, no weapon, no proof that Michelle was even deceased. But the prosecution had one more piece of evidence that proved crucial. During the investigation in 2013, they had subpoenaed David's employer records from 2004. They discovered that David had taken his boat out on the evening of June 14, 2004. Marina logs showed he had checked the boat out at 8:15 that evening, claiming he needed to run the engine. He had returned the boat at 11:45. During that time, according to the boat's fuel consumption, he had traveled approximately 30 miles offshore and back. On a normal evening, David had no reason to take the boat out. The prosecution theorized that Michelle's body was in the Gulf of Mexico, weighted down, disposed of in deep water where currents and marine life would ensure she was never found. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On April 8, 2014, they returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted. Michelle's mother collapsed in her seat, sobbing. David showed no reaction. He sat stone-faced as the judge scheduled sentencing. 6 weeks later, David Hartley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, the Honorable Catherine Reeves, spoke directly to David before imposing the sentence. "You robbed a family of their daughter," she said. "You robbed a community of a beloved teacher. You robbed Michelle Hartley of her life and her future. While her body may never be recovered, her memory will live on in the hearts of those who loved her. You will spend the remainder of your days contemplating what you took from this world." David was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. Michelle's family held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Patricia Donovan spoke, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "We may never have closure completely," she said. "We may never be able to lay Michelle to rest properly, but we know the truth now. We know that justice, however delayed, has been served. Michelle's light was extinguished too soon, but it will never be forgotten." In the years since David Hartley's conviction, there have been occasional developments. In 2016, a fisherman found a woman's skeleton tangled in a crab trap 40 miles offshore in the Gulf. Dental records confirmed it was not Michelle. In 2018, David gave an interview from prison in which he continued to maintain his innocence, claiming he was the victim of circumstantial evidence and public hysteria. No one believed him. Marissa Gilchrist lives quietly in North Carolina. She has never spoken publicly about the case since the trial. Jennifer Moss changed her name and moved to another state with Emma. Emma is an adult now, building a life free from the shadow of the man who terrorized her childhood. Michelle's parents established a scholarship in her name at Bayside Elementary. Each year, a graduating kindergartner receives money for college in memory of the teacher who loved children and wanted nothing more than to make their world brighter. The house on Coral Drive sat empty for years. Eventually, it was sold to a family who did not know its history. They painted the walls, replaced the carpets, tried to make it a home again. Whether the echoes of what happened there still linger is impossible to say. Those who believe in such things claim that places remember tragedy, that the ground itself holds onto the weight of violence. Those who do not believe simply see a house, ordinary and forgettable, on a quiet street in a small Florida town. Michelle Hartley's case became a case study in the prosecution of no-body homicides. Law enforcement agencies cite it as an example of how circumstantial evidence, when substantial enough, can secure convictions even without physical proof of death. Legal scholars debate whether the standard of proof was met, whether the jury convicted on emotion rather than evidence. Families of other missing persons look to it as hope that their own cold cases might someday be solved. The truth is that we will never know with complete certainty what happened in that house on the night of June 14, 2004. We will never know Michelle's final moments, whether she suffered, whether she knew what was coming. We will never know if David acted alone or if Marissa knew more than she admitted. We will never recover Michelle's body from the depths of the Gulf where the currents run cold and strong. What we do know is that a woman who loved teaching children, who called her mother every Sunday, who made strawberry jam toast for breakfast and dreamed of painting nurseries yellow, vanished from existence because someone who claimed to love her decided she was disposable. We know that evil does not always announce itself with obvious signs, that sometimes it sits across from you at the dinner table, sleeps beside you in bed, watches television with you on ordinary evenings, and waits for the moment when removing you from the world becomes convenient. We know that Michelle Hartley mattered. Her students remembered her. Her family mourned her. Her community, eventually, demanded justice for her. In a world where women disappear with alarming regularity, where domestic violence remains epidemic, where too many cases go unsolved and too many families receive no answers, Michelle's story is both unique and devastatingly common. The swing still hung in the backyard of the house on Coral Drive for years after Michelle disappeared, swaying slightly in the Gulf breeze, waiting for children who would never be born. The toy trucks and dolls she had collected for the yellow nursery eventually ended up donated to Goodwill, bought by families who had no idea of the dreams attached to them. The coffee mug on the nightstand, the half-finished book, the sundress with white flowers, all the small artifacts of a life interrupted, these things were boxed up, stored, eventually discarded. Physical evidence fades, but memory, stubborn and insistent, remains. If this story mattered to you, if Michelle Hartley's name will stay with you beyond this moment, then her light continues. Share this story. Demand accountability when women disappear. Question the narratives of men who show no emotion while their partners vanish. Support the families who spend decades searching for answers. Remember that behind every cold case is a person who laughed, who cried, who had favorite foods and inside jokes and plans for August vacations that never happened. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard. Someone somewhere may know something about a disappearance, about a lie, about a man who seemed too calm when he should have been devastated. Someone somewhere may have the piece of information that brings another family the justice that Michelle Hartley's family finally received after 9 years of unanswered questions. Justice for Michelle was not the ending anyone wanted. The ending everyone wanted involved Michelle walking through that door on Coral Drive, alive and safe, explaining that some terrible misunderstanding had occurred. But in a world where that ending was not possible, where violence and calculation stole that possibility away, the ending we received is the only one that honors her memory. The truth acknowledged, the guilty held accountable, and the promise that her name will not be forgotten among the many who have vanished into silence. Subscribe, share, remember. And if someone you know seems afraid of the person they live with, if their smile does not reach their eyes anymore, if they make excuses for bruises or control or isolation, reach out, ask the question. Believe them when they tell you something is wrong. Michelle Hartley does not have the chance to tell her own story anymore, but we can tell it for her. We can make sure that her death, though tragic and senseless, becomes a cautionary tale that saves someone else. That is the only real justice available now, and it is the very least we owe to the memory of a kindergarten teacher from Port St. Clair who deserved so much more than the fate that found her on a humid June night in 2004.